It started with a phone call no parent ever expects, not because of what was said, but because of who it came from. It was a Tuesday morning when Robert and Eliza Graham received a message from St. Mark's Regional School, the same school their son Nathan had attended over a decade earlier, a place that hadn't called them since the day everything changed. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but it only took 5 words to shatter everything they thought they knew. "We think we found Nathan." 10 years earlier, in the fall of 2013, Nathan Graham, just 13 years old, vanished without a trace. He was last seen leaving the school's science building, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his hoodie pulled tight against the rain. Security cameras caught him walking toward the side exit, alone. He never made it home. His disappearance stunned the small Ohio town of Halston Ridge. Police scoured neighborhoods, rivers, forests, any path a boy his age might have taken. There were no witnesses, no ransom note, no evidence of foul play. His phone was found, powered off, in a locker at school. His wallet had been left behind. No one saw him again. For 10 years, his parents waited. Each birthday passed like a funeral, each news report a cruel reminder that the world was moving on while they were stuck in the pause between hope and grief. But then came the call. A decade later, a staff member at St. Mark's had flagged something strange. A recent file, miscategorized and buried in the school's database, contained a photograph taken during a student exchange event. And, in the background, a teenage boy with a face that looked eerily familiar. Too familiar. Facial recognition confirmed the resemblance. Metadata confirmed the location. The timestamp confirmed the impossible. Because the boy in the photo, if it really was Nathan, had been there just last year, and so began a second investigation, one that would turn every assumption inside out. Because if Nathan was alive, where had he been all this time? Who had he become? And why had no one found him until now? This is the story of a boy who vanished from a school hallway, the parents who never stopped looking, and the photo that cracked a mystery wide open 10 years later. And it all began with a phone call no one saw coming. Nathan Graham was the kind of kid teachers remembered for the right reasons. Quiet, respectful, thoughtful, maybe a little shy but sharp when it counted. He was 13 in the fall of 2013, a 7th grader at St. Mark's Regional School in Halston Ridge, Ohio. His room was filled with science magazines, Lego models, and sketches of aircraft he swore he'd build one day. He lived with his parents, Robert and Eliza, in a modest brick house just 5 minutes from the school. His daily routine was consistent. Breakfast at 7:10, out the door by 7:40, and back home by 3:30, unless he stayed for chess club or robotics. October 14th, 2013, was supposed to be like any other Monday. Overcast, a little chilly. Nathan wore his green hoodie, jeans, and his favorite sneakers, black with orange laces. He had a math quiz that day and had stayed up late the night before, double-checking formulas. His mother packed his lunch: ham sandwich, pretzels, a granola bar, and a juice box. Everything about the morning was normal, until it wasn't. School let out at 3 p.m. Nathan's last class was science, room 207, with Mr. Halloway. Attendance was normal. The lesson ran long, so students left the building staggered. Nathan was seen walking out by a classmate, Sarah Lynn, who later told police. He said goodbye like always, just "see you tomorrow." That was it. CCTV footage shows Nathan exiting the side entrance of the school at exactly 3:09 p.m., stepping into the misty afternoon alone. Then, nothing. That was the last time anyone saw him. When Nathan didn't come home by 4 o'clock, Eliza assumed he'd stayed late. She texted him. No reply. By 4:30, she was calling the school. By 5:15, she was driving the loop between the school and their house. By 6:03, she called 911. "My son hasn't come home from school. He's 13. This has never happened before." The search began that night. Police interviewed teachers, students, the bus driver, nearby shop owners. Nathan hadn't taken the bus. He hadn't asked anyone for a ride. No one remembered seeing him on the main road. His phone, found in his locker, showed no calls or messages after 12:47 p.m. No social media activity, nothing suspicious. He had simply walked away. For Robert and Eliza, the first 24 hours were a blur of panic. They retraced the steps police had already covered. Nathan's school books were untouched, his bed still made. The front porch light stayed on all night. His father put it simply in a press conference 2 days later. "He's not the kind of kid who runs off. This doesn't make sense." Volunteers joined the search. Helicopters were brought in. Dogs traced a faint scent to the woods behind the school, but it disappeared near a utility road, leading to speculation that Nathan may have gotten into a vehicle. Theories spiraled. Had someone lured him? Did he fall and get hurt? Was it an abduction? Detectives explored everything. A known sex offender had recently moved to the county, but had an airtight alibi. A delivery truck driver reported seeing a boy near a drainage ditch. But the timeline didn't match. Tips came from out of state. A gas station camera showed a boy in a hoodie, but not Nathan's face. By week 2, the leads dried up. No signs of struggle, no ransom note, no contact from anyone claiming involvement, just silence. The Graham family held on. Eliza continued packing Nathan's lunch every morning, just in case. Robert started a blog called Finding Nathan that gained traction in the true crime community. Their story was featured on several daytime talk shows. Missing posters became a permanent fixture on telephone poles and bulletin boards around town. But as the holidays approached, the mood shifted. Hope was still there, but it came with heavy breath and lowered voices. School returned after winter break with one less student. The 7th grade class quietly removed Nathan's name from the yearbook roster. Then came the milestones. Nathan's 14th birthday passed. Then 15th. Then his would-be high school graduation. Eliza kept a drawer full of gifts she never got to give. A watch, a Letterman jacket, a drone kit he would have loved. Robert eventually stopped posting updates. They did everything parents are told to do. They organized search teams, worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, even paid for a private investigator. But there was no trail to follow. The police officially categorized the case as cold in 2016. 3 years missing, no evidence of foul play, no remains, no leads. Nathan Graham had vanished, not into darkness, but into thin air. By the end of 2016, the town of Halston Ridge had adjusted to life without Nathan. That's the strange thing about time. It doesn't stop for pain. Eventually, seasons change, schools graduate new classes, and people stop flinching at the sight of a green hoodie. But for Robert and Eliza, time froze. Their world remained suspended on October 14th, 2013. They kept Nathan's room the same. His posters, his drawings, even his half-finished Lego spaceship sat untouched. It wasn't a shrine. It was a lifeline, a stubborn refusal to let go. "People said we should move on," Robert once told a local journalist. "But you don't bury a child when there's no body. You don't hold a funeral when there's still a chance." Still, the world around them grew quieter. Friends stopped calling as often. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Even the detective originally assigned to the case had transferred departments by early 2017. The police still answered questions, but rarely had anything new to offer. "No new leads. We're keeping the file open," they'd say. But nothing promising yet. Eliza, once a school counselor herself, left her job in 2015. She couldn't face the halls, not after the year her son disappeared inside one. Robert, a mechanical engineer, buried himself in contract work, but his colleagues noticed the change. He stopped showing up at team lunches, stopped laughing. He'd leave meetings early, eyes lost in some distant place that none of them could reach. He always looked like he was waiting, one coworker later said. Like any second the phone might ring. And they did wait, every day, for nearly a decade. The coldest part of a missing persons case isn't the silence. It's the noise that pretends to be hope. Throughout the years, the Grahams received dozens of tips, people convinced they'd seen Nathan in diners, malls, airports, shelters. Each tip triggered a fresh round of anxiety. Each false alarm chipped away at their resilience. One woman from Missouri swore she'd seen a teenage boy matching Nathan's description working at a roadside car wash. She even snapped a photo and emailed it anonymously. The boy looked similar. Same jawline, same posture. The Grahams drove 400 miles to see for themselves. It wasn't him. "It took us 6 hours to get there," Eliza later recalled. "It took 6 seconds to know it wasn't Nathan. But we stayed for 2 days, just in case." Other tips were cruel hoaxes, kids playing pranks, strangers seeking attention, online trolls exploiting their grief. The police once had to track down an IP address after someone sent a message claiming Nathan had been sold into trafficking. It was fake, but the damage was real. In 2018, the family hired a private investigator named Connie Delgado. She had worked on several cold cases, including one involving a girl found alive in Michigan after 6 years. Delgado reviewed the entire case from scratch: surveillance footage, school records, friend interviews. She found inconsistencies, but no breakthroughs. One minor lead involved a janitor who claimed to have seen Nathan speaking with an unknown man in a black car days before his disappearance. But the janitor's memory was inconsistent and unsupported by any other witness or camera. Another possible thread emerged when a former classmate said Nathan had been acting different in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, distracted, quieter than usual. But no one had pressed him on it at the time. "It's easy to see patterns in hindsight," Delgado noted in her report, "but that doesn't mean they point to truth." By the fall of 2020, Delgado had exhausted her leads. She promised to remain available but confessed the same frustrating reality. Unless something new surfaced, some fresh clue, someone coming forward, Nathan's case would remain what it had become: an absence too loud to ignore, and too quiet to solve. Meanwhile, the world kept evolving. Social media exploded with groups dedicated to missing persons, online sleuths, amateur analysts. The Graham family was hesitant to lean into internet speculation, but one Facebook page, Bring Nathan Home, became a small hub for renewed interest. Maintained by a volunteer named Tammy Rivera, it documented sightings, archived interviews, and kept Nathan's name from fading entirely. It was Tammy who first mentioned the idea of face-age simulation technology in early 2021. Several law enforcement agencies had started using AI tools to generate aged versions of missing children. The Grahams submitted Nathan's photos to one such program. The results were uncanny. The image looked like him, older, of course, more defined in the jaw, but those eyes were the same. Catherine printed the photo and taped it to her refrigerator. Robert stared at it every morning before work, wondering, if Nathan were out there, did he look like this? In January 2023, just 2 months before everything changed, Eliza wrote a journal entry that later appeared in a short memoir. 10 years, and I still believe. Not every minute, not every day. But somewhere inside me there is still a voice that whispers, he's out there, and one day I'll hear his voice again. That voice came sooner than she expected, because on March 12, 2023, the phone rang. It was the front office at St. Mark's Regional School. We think we've found Nathan. And in that moment, after 10 years of aching silence, everything turned upside down. When Nathan disappeared in 2013, the initial response was fast, thorough, and intensely emotional. Local media covered the story daily. Search teams canvassed neighborhoods. Volunteers pinned flyers on every storefront window from Halston Ridge to nearby counties. But by the start of 2014, reality began to set in. Nathan Graham wasn't going to be found overnight, and maybe not ever. The case was officially classified as open but cold by early 2016. To most, that meant the trail had gone cold, but to Robert and Eliza, it meant the world had gone cold. The calls stopped, the press quieted, and they were left clinging to shadows. The Grahams weren't ready to let go, though. Eliza compiled a detailed timeline of Nathan's final week, noting even the smallest deviations in his behavior. Had he been quieter? Had he left anything behind at home? Was there anything in his notebooks, drawings, or conversations that had hinted at what was to come? "I used to read his journals over and over," she later confessed, looking for some message, some warning I missed. She found nothing. No goodbye, no mention of pain or fear, just math problems, doodles, and a list of questions for a science fair project on tornadoes. Robert took a different route. He focused on infrastructure, where cameras were, who had access to the school that day, traffic light logs, even digital footprints. He learned how to parse metadata from social media photos, how to pull GPS logs, and how to track usernames across forums. "I wasn't trained for this," he said, "but I couldn't do nothing. That would have killed me." Halston Ridge, though sympathetic, slowly moved on. New students filled the classrooms. Nathan's peers graduated and left town. Only a handful of teachers and friends continued to carry his memory closely. One of them was Sarah Lynn, the last student to see him that day. She remained in touch with the Grahams even after moving out of state. In a message to Eliza in 2017, she wrote, "I still think about him, all the time. I remember that moment so clearly, him walking away. I just wish I'd said something more." But memory is fragile, and time has a way of bending it. By 2018, the Grahams had exhausted every traditional path. That's when they turned to the digital world, a space both promising and predatory. At first, they posted on established missing persons forums, then Reddit, then true crime Facebook groups. They were approached by amateur sleuths, podcasters, even psychics. Some offered genuine support. Others were clearly there for attention. One man from Oregon claimed to be a remote viewer and said he had seen Nathan in a vision, in a desert, barefoot and alone. Another user insisted Nathan had been abducted by a cult operating out of Kentucky. That thread ran over 300 comments before being removed for violating platform policy. But amid the noise, there were moments of genuine insight. A Reddit user pointed out that the school's security camera footage showed Nathan taking an exit typically used only by staff, a small detail that had gone mostly unnoticed. Another amateur researcher discovered that a white delivery van had passed the school 3 times in under 20 minutes that day, but police had never found its driver. Robert began coordinating with these users, sharing case files, timelines, and photos. He created a Google Drive folder labeled Project N. It became a crowdsourced investigation. For a brief time, there was momentum, but leads fizzled. Users lost interest. People moved on. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic brought everything to a halt. The Grahams found themselves isolated once again. Eliza described it as a second disappearance. The world was too busy to care about a missing boy from 10 years ago. But it was during this time, in the stillness and silence, that something shifted. Eliza began writing. She started a blog not about Nathan, but about grief. about the weight of unanswered questions, about how the world expects you to grieve and heal in a straight line when the truth is far more chaotic. They think closure is a box you get to check off. But how do you close something that never opened all the way? The blog gained traction, especially among parents of missing children. She found a community not of detectives but of survivors, people who lived every day with ghosts no one else could see. Then came a turning point, quiet at first, but impossible to ignore. In late 2022, a school administrator at St. Mark's was digitizing old photos from school events for their upcoming 75th anniversary. She came across a folder marked Student Exchange 2021. Inside were dozens of images from a joint event with a private school in Michigan. In one group photo, barely visible in the background, stood a teenage boy wearing a gray hoodie, tall, thin, with familiar eyes. At first, she passed over it, but later that night, unable to shake the feeling, she pulled up the old photos of Nathan Graham. Could it be? She brought the image to the principal. He brought it to law enforcement, and within weeks, facial recognition software confirmed what human instinct already suspected. The boy in the photo was a 91% match to Nathan Graham, aged forward to approximately 17 years old. The metadata confirmed it had been taken in 2021, nearly 8 years after his disappearance. And suddenly, a case, long frozen in time, began to thaw. The discovery of the photo ignited a surge of controlled chaos behind the scenes. Law enforcement didn't want to leak the find publicly, not yet. They needed verification, confirmation, and most importantly, caution. It had been nearly a decade since Nathan disappeared. If the boy in the image really was him, then a far more delicate question emerged. Where had he been? And why hadn't he come home? The image, grainy but clear enough to analyze, was sent to facial recognition analysts at the Bureau's Missing Children Division. After 2 days, they responded with the official report. 91.3% match confidence with Nathan Graham. Investigators returned to the school to retrieve more photos from the same event. In 3 other images, the same teenager appeared, always at the edge of the crowd, never centered. He didn't smile. He wasn't interacting with anyone in particular, but he was there. Detectives then reached out to the Michigan partner school. A short list of visiting students was provided. Cross-referencing names with school records led to one anomaly, a student registered under the name Jacob Ellis, with a falsified birth certificate and limited background data. The address on file led to a foster home near Ann Arbor. By this point, investigators were operating under the assumption that Jacob Ellis was, in fact, Nathan Graham, or someone very closely connected to him. But when they reached the home, Jacob wasn't there. He'd run again. The next 3 weeks were a blur of renewed urgency. A regional alert went out. Detectives reviewed transportation logs, shelter records, and internet activity connected to the foster home. It became apparent that Jacob, or Nathan, had been living under the radar for some time. He had no real digital footprint, no social media presence, no ID history prior to 2017. That's when investigators made the decision to contact Robert and Eliza. The call came at 7:23 a.m. on March 12, 2023. "This is Officer Gaines with the Halston Ridge PD. I believe we may have a break in your son's case." At first, they couldn't comprehend it. A school photo? From Michigan? Was it some prank? Some mistake? But the more details they heard, the more real it became. The Grahams were shown the photo, and Eliza gasped before covering her mouth. "That's him," she whispered. "That's my son." She recognized the eyes, the way he tucked his chin slightly when photographed, the curl of hair that still drifted onto his forehead. Robert was more cautious, but not unconvinced. "If it's him, we just want to talk. We don't need to know everything. We just want him to be okay." Meanwhile, the search continued. A breakthrough came via a bus terminal camera. Security footage showed Jacob boarding a Greyhound bus in Detroit, headed eastbound toward Pennsylvania. A week later, a tip came in from a youth shelter in Pittsburgh. A boy matching the description had stopped in for food, but refused to give his name. Officers arrived the next morning, but he was already gone. Eventually, the trail led to an abandoned warehouse in a quiet industrial part of town. There, huddled behind a stack of rusted shelves, they found him, dazed, exhausted, but alive. He didn't resist. He didn't run. He simply looked up at the officer and said, "Is it time?" He was taken into protective custody, and DNA confirmation followed within days. It was him, Nathan Graham, age 23, missing for 10 years, living under an alias for at least half of them. The country held its breath as the news broke. Missing Ohio boy found alive in Pennsylvania after a decade. Facebook photo unlocks cold case. Where has Nathan Graham been? But the question that followed was more complicated. Why hadn't he come home? According to preliminary interviews, Nathan had run away intentionally. He claimed he never planned to vanish permanently, only to get away for a few days. But something shifted. The longer he stayed hidden, the harder it became to return. Fear turned into shame. Shame turned into silence. He spoke of feeling invisible, misunderstood, pressured to be perfect. He said he wasn't abused, but overwhelmed. And one day, it became too much. He left the school grounds by the maintenance gate, caught a ride from a delivery driver, stayed in abandoned buildings, shelters, occasionally with strangers who didn't ask too many questions. Eventually, he landed in Michigan, where he assumed a new name and entered the foster system as an unaccompanied minor. "No one ever asked where I came from," he told one interviewer, "and I stopped volunteering it." When asked why he didn't reach out as an adult, he paused for a long time before answering. "I was afraid they wouldn't want me anymore, that they'd moved on, that they were better off." What he didn't know, what no photo could show, was that his parents had never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, and now they had him back. Not the boy who disappeared, but the man who survived. Nathan Graham sat across from a pair of seasoned detectives in a quiet interview room in Pittsburgh, eyes downcast, hands clasped loosely in his lap. He looked nothing like the photos that had hung on telephone poles for years. He was taller, leaner, with a short, uneven haircut and faint lines under his eyes that hinted at sleep lost and years lived in shadows. But the resemblance was there. The eyes, the posture, the quietness that now had a history behind it. When the interview began, Nathan didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't resist. He didn't even seem confused. He just surrendered. "I know this was going to happen eventually," he said softly. "I always knew it couldn't last forever." The detectives didn't push, not yet. They wanted him to speak freely, and for the first time in a decade, Nathan did. He told them the story not like someone recalling events, but like someone unpacking a secret that had sat heavy on his chest for far too long. October 14th, 2013, the day he vanished. Nathan had felt something building inside him for weeks. Pressure, anxiety, a sense that he didn't belong anywhere, not at school, not at home, not in his own skin. He said he wasn't being abused. He wasn't being bullied. But he felt erased. "It was like I was a passenger in my own life. No one saw it. I hid it well." That Monday he had a science quiz, one he wasn't prepared for. But that wasn't what pushed him. The truth, he said, was simpler and sadder. He just wanted to disappear for a while. So when the last bell rang, he walked out the side exit, slipped through the staff gate near the dumpsters, and kept walking. He didn't know where he was going, just that he wasn't going home. He wandered for hours, using his lunch money to buy a bottle of water and a granola bar from a gas station. At sunset, he found himself at a highway stop on Route 83. That's where he met John, a truck driver who offered him a lift as far as Cleveland. Nathan didn't give his real name. He told John he'd run away from a foster home and didn't want to go back. John didn't ask questions. That ride began a string of new identities, new places, and new lies. By the time he reached Michigan, Nathan was already calling himself Jacob. He was just 14 when he entered the foster system under that name. He said he lived in over a dozen group homes, shelters, and temporary placements. He made sure to be a low-maintenance kid, quiet, obedient, helpful. The system didn't dig too deep. The less you stand out, the longer you stay. He enrolled in school under his new identity and began trying to build a life, or at least hide inside one. But he never forgot his old life. He even said he followed his own case online at times. Once, he watched an interview of his mother crying on national television. That almost broke me. I wanted to call. I did. But I was scared. Scared of what she'd say, what she'd feel. Scared they'd hate him. Scared they'd moved on. What shocked detectives most wasn't just the details of his escape, but the quiet normalcy of the life he built afterward. Nathan didn't turn to drugs or gangs. He didn't commit crimes. He worked part-time jobs, earned his GED, volunteered at a local food bank. His records showed a young man trying, desperately, to stay invisible by doing nothing wrong. When asked why he never reached out as an adult, his answer was heartbreakingly simple. Every day I waited made it harder. It's like being underwater. The longer you stay down, the more terrifying it is to come up. As Nathan spoke, officers listened in stunned silence. The boy everyone thought had been abducted, harmed, even killed, had just walked away, and kept walking. And somewhere along the way had convinced himself the door home had closed for good. But it hadn't. Robert and Eliza had spent 10 years waiting at that door. When detectives asked Nathan if he wanted to contact his parents, his eyes filled with tears for the first time. "I don't know what I'd even say," he whispered. But they told him something he needed to hear. They never stopped looking for you. Not once. And that changed everything. The reunion was arranged carefully. A quiet meeting at a private facility in Pennsylvania. No cameras. No press, just two parents who'd spent a decade in limbo, and a son who had finally surfaced. When Eliza saw him, she didn't scream or cry. She just walked forward, trembling, and placed her hands on either side of his face. "You're here," she whispered. "You're really here." Robert stood frozen for a moment. Then, almost awkwardly, he reached out, pulling Nathan into the kind of hug that speaks every word a parent can't. There were tears, but there was no blame, only love. The days following Nathan's return weren't like the movies. There were no grand celebrations, no media-covered homecomings with balloons and banners. It was quiet, careful, the kind of reunion built less on relief and more on rebuilding. Nathan stayed at a secure care facility for the first week, not because he was a danger, but because professionals wanted to ensure he was mentally and emotionally stable before transitioning home. Eliza and Robert visited every day, sometimes sitting with him for hours without saying much at all. "We didn't ask questions," Robert later shared. "Not at first. We didn't want to push. Just sit near him. Let him feel safe." The boy they had lost was now a man. A quiet, guarded, polite adult who still flinched slightly at sudden sounds, who didn't like being touched without warning, who apologized for things that didn't need apologies. The trauma wasn't obvious at first glance, but it lived in the small things. He hadn't forgotten how to laugh. But it took time. One of the first conversations Eliza had with him was about his name, whether he wanted to be called Nathan again or remain Jacob. His reply was quiet. "I'm not sure. I think I'm both." They compromised. At home, he'd be Nathan. With doctors and officials, he could still use Jacob if he needed time to transition. It wasn't about legalities. It was about identity. about giving him the space to rediscover who he was and who he wanted to become. Therapists described Nathan's case as a complex survival identity. He hadn't simply faked a name or run away. He had crafted an entirely new self out of fear, guilt, and emotional survival. In doing so, he had created a version of himself that didn't exist before. Jacob, the boy who didn't cause problems, who kept quiet, who kept moving. But underneath that was still Nathan, curious, creative, and deeply emotional. In sessions with psychologists, he began to open up about the early days after his disappearance, how he had spent 3 nights sleeping under a bridge before finding someone who would drive him across state lines, how he had nearly gone back, twice, but froze both times when he pictured his parents' faces. "It wasn't that I didn't love them," he said. "It was that I thought they wouldn't love me anymore, that I broke something." The truth was, that thought had haunted him more than the hunger, the fear, or the loneliness. Meanwhile, the story had reached the media. Despite attempts to keep it quiet, a local journalist caught wind of the DNA match and ran a small piece, "Missing Boy Found After 10 Years, Living Under Alias." It didn't take long for the national outlets to follow. Suddenly, reporters were parked outside the Graham home. The phone rang with interview requests, book deals, podcast inquiries. One tabloid even offered 6 figures for exclusive rights. Robert declined everyone. "This isn't a story," he told them. "This is our son, and he's not for sale." In the community of Halston Ridge, the news was met with shock, then joy, then confusion. People wanted to know why, how. Some felt angry, as if they'd been lied to, as if their grief had been wasted. Others saw it as a miracle. A ghost returned. The school where Nathan once studied held a small candlelight gathering. Not a vigil, but a celebration of sorts. His 7th-grade teacher, Mr. Halloway, spoke softly at the microphone. "We never stopped thinking about him, and we never will." Nathan didn't attend. Not yet. He wasn't ready. At home, the adjustment was slow. He didn't sleep in his old room right away. Instead, the Grahams set up a guest space for him. Less familiar, less overwhelming. Over time, he started exploring his old room again, opening drawers, smiling at the things he used to love. A Lego spaceship still sat on the shelf. His sketchpad was tucked in the closet, yellowed but untouched. One afternoon, he found a sealed envelope on his old desk. Inside was a letter, written by Eliza, dated 6 months after his disappearance. "Dear Nathan, if you ever read this, I want you to know we never gave up. Not one day, not 1 minute. I believe you're alive. I believe you're out there, and I believe that someday, somehow, we'll find our way back to each other." Nathan folded it carefully and didn't say a word. But that night, for the first time in 10 years, he asked to eat dinner with his parents. He began taking steps toward healing. He met with a trauma counselor twice a week. He started journaling. He even picked up sketching again. Only now his drawings were of cities, bridges, and people walking in crowds. Quiet, anonymous figures that mirrored the life he once lived. He also began speaking with other kids who had gone missing and returned, an underground support group organized by the National Missing and Exploited Children Network. There, for the first time, he met people who understood the guilt, the pressure, the fear of going home. "They all felt like ghosts," he said once, "and I realized, so did I." Nathan eventually gave a single, controlled interview with a child psychologist on a private podcast focused on trauma recovery. In it, he said, "I thought disappearing was freedom, but really it was just another kind of prison. I was free from everyone, except myself." The world listened, and for many, it was a wake-up call about mental health, about the invisible struggles kids carry, about how easy it is to miss what's happening right in front of you, and about how long the road home can be, even when the door is wide open. Life after a miracle isn't always simple. After the tears, the headlines, and the emotional reunions, reality begins to seep back in. For the Graham family, normal had to be redefined again. Nathan's return was the end of one story, but the beginning of another. A longer, quieter one. Less about mystery and more about healing. At 23, Nathan had never learned to drive. He had no real job history under his legal name, no bank account, no medical record since 2013. His Social Security number was flagged for dormancy. He had spent nearly half his life in hiding and now had to catch up to a world that had moved on without him. Robert began by helping him build a resume. Eliza scheduled his first doctor's appointment in a decade, and together they contacted the Ohio Bureau of Vital Statistics to begin the slow process of restoring Nathan's legal identity. "It was surreal," Eliza said. "We had to prove our son was our son, even after he came back to us." In one appointment, a clerk at the DMV asked for proof of residence. Nathan smiled shyly and said, "I've only lived in places I never belonged." The woman looked confused. Eliza answered for him. "He lives with us. He's home now." Therapy remained a constant. Nathan continued sessions twice a week, slowly confronting the layers of shame and survival that had defined him for so long. His therapist described his mindset as slow-motion re-entry. He had questions most 23-year-olds don't think to ask. How to file taxes, how to enroll in community college, how to make friends without lying about who you are. More importantly, he began exploring why he left and what it would take to stay. "I didn't know how to ask for help," Nathan said, "so I disappeared instead." In group sessions, he started connecting with other young adults who had experienced long-term disconnection from their families, runaway youth, system survivors, those who had been trafficked, and those who simply fell through the cracks. He wasn't the only one, and that helped. Meanwhile, the world around the Grahams began to settle. The news cycle moved on, the reporters left. The neighbors returned to their routines, but at home everything felt both familiar and different. Robert returned to work part-time, but with new boundaries. Eliza began writing again, not her grief blog, but essays on resilience, trauma recovery, and family. She even started giving talks at counseling conferences, using their story to highlight the long-term psychological impacts of missing person cases. On families, yes, but also on the missing themselves. One of her talks was titled, "When They Come Back, the New Unknown." "People think the hardest part is the disappearance," she said, "but what no one prepares you for is how hard it is when they come home." Nathan, now enrolled in a GED prep program, began speaking publicly on his own terms, not to the media, but to high school classes, youth shelters, and foster centers. He shared his story not for fame, but for others like him. "There's always a way back," he told one auditorium of students, "even if you think you've been gone too long." In his talks, he focused less on the how of his disappearance and more on the why, the emotional silence, the invisible burdens, the fear of imperfection. "I didn't leave because I hated my parents," he said. "I left because I didn't know how to stay." It was a message that resonated. Teens reached out to him, some anonymously, some openly. Parents, too. People who had lost someone, to distance, to silence, to fear. Nathan had become something he never imagined, a voice for the invisible. At home, things weren't always easy. There were awkward dinners, nights when Nathan still chose to eat in his room, days when Robert struggled to connect beyond logistics. But there were small wins, too. Nathan helped Eliza plant a new garden in the backyard. He watched old movies with Robert on Saturdays. He even found his old Game Boy and played Pokémon for hours, picking up right where his 13-year-old self had left off. The house, once a museum of memory, was becoming a home again. One afternoon in late fall, Nathan asked to visit his old school. They went on a Sunday when the building was closed, just the three of them, walking the halls like tourists in a life that almost disappeared. Nathan stood in front of his old locker, ran his fingers across the chipped paint, and smiled. "This feels smaller than I remember," he said. In the library, Eliza watched him pause at a shelf and pull down a book. His name was still written inside, in faded blue ink. He ran his hand over the page. "I used to sit right there," he said, pointing to a beanbag in the corner. "That's where I was the day before I left." They stood in silence for a long time, not in mourning, but in gratitude. The following spring, Nathan officially changed his name back on paper, from Jacob Ellis to Nathan Graham. It wasn't a rejection of his past identity, but a reconciliation with it. "Jacob was who I had to be to survive," he explained in a letter posted to his therapist's blog. "But Nathan is who I was born to be, and I'm learning how to be him again." The day he received his new ID in the mail, Robert quietly handed him a small wooden box. Inside was Nathan's old student ID, a set of house keys, and a single photo of him as a child on his bike. No speech, no tears, just a quiet gesture that said, "Welcome back." Eliza and Robert, too, were changing. They sold their second car, a vehicle they had kept all those years in case Nathan ever returned and needed transportation. In its place, they bought a used camper van. "Maybe we'll drive to all the places he wandered through," Eliza joked. "Retrace his freedom, but do it together." They never did. But the idea of the van, of movement, of reclaiming space, mattered. Nathan's journey wasn't linear. There were setbacks. He struggled with insomnia, often waking from vivid dreams about being lost in crowds or chased down alleyways. He had occasional panic attacks in busy grocery stores. He still found it hard to explain who he was, or had been, to people who didn't already know. Dating felt impossible. Trust, even harder. But he persisted. He kept a notebook filled with things he wanted to experience, firsts that most people take for granted. First concert, first time voting, first trip on a plane, first Thanksgiving at home. Each one became a milestone. By 2025, Nathan began college part-time, majoring in psychology. His goal wasn't to become a therapist, at least not yet, but he wanted to understand the science of what he had lived. "I don't want to just heal. I want to help other people find the trail back." He volunteered at a non-profit that supported runaway and homeless youth. Some of the kids reminded him of himself, quiet, watchful, tired from carrying more than their hearts were meant to bear. He didn't tell them everything, but he told them enough. "I've been where you are, and it's not too late." The Graham house became a place of renewal, not just for their family, but for others. Every summer they hosted a backyard gathering for families of missing children. Some had found their loved ones, some hadn't, but there was something powerful in being together, in remembering and hoping and healing as a community. In one of the gatherings, a father asked Nathan a question. "What's the one thing you wish your parents had known back then?" Nathan paused, then replied, "That silence doesn't mean safety. If I had known it was okay to say I wasn't okay, I might not have run." By 2026, Nathan was living in his own apartment across town. He still visited home often. Sunday dinners, movie nights, quiet conversations in the backyard. He kept a photo of himself and his parents on his bookshelf, a recent one. Everyone smiling, everyone present. He didn't look back often anymore, but when he did, it was with understanding, not shame. He forgave himself, and that was the hardest part. One evening, during a community Q&A event, someone asked him what he thought of the phrase, "happy ending." Nathan chuckled softly before answering, "It's not about happy endings, it's about honest ones, and mine's still being written." In a world that moves fast and forgets faster, Stories like Nathan Graham's remind us of something quietly profound, that even after 10 years in the dark, a light can still find its way in. His disappearance was not defined by violence or foul play, but by silence, the kind that creeps in unnoticed, settles in the quiet corners of a young mind, and convinces a child that their pain is invisible, or worse, inexcusable. And yet he survived. Not just the years alone, but the return, the shame, the hard work of rebuilding trust step by step. His journey wasn't perfect or easy or complete, but it was real, and it was his. What makes this story unforgettable isn't the mystery. It's the resilience of a boy who lost himself and the family that never stopped setting a place at the table. It's about the second chance that so many never get, and what it takes to live it. We often imagine that reunions are the finish line, but the truth is, they're just the next chapter. Nathan didn't come home to the same life. He came home to the love that waited through years of not knowing. And that love, patient, battered, unwavering, made healing possible. So now we leave you with this question. What would you have done if your child disappeared into silence? And what would you say if one day they came back? Let us know in the comments. If you found this story as haunting, human, and important as we did, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life mysteries and recoveries that go deeper than headlines. Sometimes, the most powerful truth is the one that finally finds its way home.